What's up guys, Asian here with the fourth video covering misconceptions and misinformation in ESO and trying to clear them up. Today we're going to be talking about this concept of light attacks, animation canceling, light attack weaving, that a lot of players have, that this is some sort of an exploit, that this is a glitch or a bug, and that you can get banned or suspended for basically animation canceling, specifically light attack weaving specifically. So I was trying to find the developer's statement, but it seems like wherever it is, it's either really hard to find or it's been deleted. But the history behind light attack weaving and animation canceling in general is a long one. It was actually way back, I think, in the beta, if I'm remembering right. Either in the beta or very shortly after release, the devs were made aware that light attack weaving was a thing that players were doing in-game. At the time, the developers basically said that it was not an intended aspect of the combat system. They didn't really think of light attack or light attack weaving being an important part of the combat system. And so it was really at that point, it was considered sort of a bug or an unintended consequence of the way that they had developed their combat system. Now, I don't remember specifically whether or not they said they would be addressing it, but over time, the devs eventually came to accept light attack weaving as basically part of ESO's combat system. They came to accept animation canceling as part of the general combat system for ESO, and it's gone so far that they've actually go ahead and zoom in on this. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but they have gone so far as to introduce a loading screen tip describing light attack weaving. So the tip looks like this. Once you've begun a light attack, you can immediately activate an ability from your skill bar without interrupting that light attack. That's basically describing light attack weaving, although there isn't any specific tooltip that took a look specifically at animation canceling. That being said, animation canceling is a part of pretty much a lot of different games, not even just MMOs, just RPGs and other video games in general, where animation canceling basically refers to canceling out of a skill animation or an item use animation in order to get to your next ability faster in a certain sort of way. So rather than waiting out for the animation to play in full, you sort of stop the animation short because of the way the game works, that specific game. You're able to input a skill ability or an item use or whatever you want before the animation actually ends. So an example of this would be in ESO, where some of these skills have very long cast times, or not cast times, but animations, longer than the global cooldown of 1 second. So you can actually cancel out of that animation after the 1 second, because after that 1 second global cooldown is over, you're able to use your next ability even if the animation of the first ability hasn't ended. Now, there are some abilities in ESO and other games where there's something called an animation lock, where you actually can't do anything because your character is hard-coded to be stuck in that animation. So a good example of this would be in Final Fantasy, the limit breaks in group content. All of those have animation locks where once you have started the animation, you can't cancel out of that animation until a certain period of time has passed. ESO, as far as I'm aware, doesn't really have any animation locks. There might be 1 or 2 skills or abilities that do have an animation lock that is longer than 1 second, but most skills in this game can be animation canceled, including light attacks and heavy attacks as well. So now that we've kind of covered a little bit of the history behind light attacks and animation canceling, and how they are an accepted part of the ESO combat design at this point, let's talk about the importance of light attack weaving. So we have 4 different ESO logs here. So ESO logs is probably going to be the most objective place to look for anything related to DPS, tanking, healing, basically any sort of endgame content. It's going to be the most objective source of information out there. So I have 4 different logs here. And what I want to point out here is the contribution of light attacks to your overall DPS. So these first 2 logs here are both mine, back when I used to play ESO. So this was our Godslayer run. So I have 2 different Godslayer runs here. Both of these were against Navintas. As you can see here, in this first log here, light attacks made up almost 20% of my DPS. So in terms of my total DPS against Navintas, I did 40.8k DPS on Navintas. And 8k, 8.1k came from my light attacks. And this is ignoring the fact that light attacks are also important for proccing enchants and other sort of set effects as well if you have those sets. So this is not an insignificant part of my DPS. If I had done very bad light attack weaving, if my light attack ratio was half of this, I would be losing about 4k DPS or about 10% of my overall DPS. So, 20%, 10%. If I didn't light attack at all, I'd be losing out a full 20% of my DPS, dropping me by this whole 8k down to 32k. Now you might be asking, well, what's the big deal? 8k doesn't seem like all that much in DPS. But if you think about it, a 20% dip in damage output is actually quite large. So if you think about, let's say you are... swimming is with a sport that I used to do in high school. And there was an event called the 500-yard freestyle. So basically you swam in an Olympic-sized pool. I believe it's 400 meters, which equals out to be about 500 yards. But in a high school-sized pool, short course pool, you would be swimming 20 laps. So think of it like this. You are starting your race, you're doing 20 laps. The guy finishes. Whoever is ahead of you finishes. But you still have 20% of the race left to do. 20% of 20 laps is still 4 laps. You still have to do 100 yards of swimming. Meanwhile, the other guy is already out of the water. He's resting up for his next event. That is how big of a difference 20% is. So think of it like a running race. Let's say you're doing the 400-yard dash, for example. Or I guess that's not really a dash, but let's say you're running 400 yards. The person has finished, and you still have 80 yards left to go in that instance. That's not an insignificant amount, especially in endgame PvE content. 20% of your DPS is pretty sizable. Here in this parse here, against Navitas here, my light attacks made up a little bit less, 17.62%. But it's still the highest contributor to my overall DPS. None of these other abilities contribute as much DPS as my light attacks do. So light attack weaving is pretty important for overall DPS. For more recent stuff, this was a random ESO log that I pulled, and this is from a Magicka DK again. But this one has dual wield and an Inferno Staff. So you can see here that if you add these two values up, so 6.7 and 15.19, you get a value of 21.89%. Over 20% of your DPS is coming from light attacks here. That is a huge amount of DPS, and this is just for bosses. So remember, light attacks are single target attacks, so it's going to impact your single target DPS, not so much your AoE DPS. But that's a pretty huge contribution here. 21%, just over 21%. And this last log is from Nephis, from his Stamina DK. Again, this is Rockgrove, different boss this time. You have dual wield and two-handed, and if you add these two values up, 10.41, 3.21, you get a value of 13.62. Now that's not quite as high as Molten Whip here, but it's still the second highest contribution to your overall DPS, your two light attacks, when you add their percentages together. Again, pretty big contribution here. Not as much as the other three logs, 13.5%-ish, but that's still a sizable chunk of your DPS. So going back to the 400-yard run or 500-yard swimming, 15% of 500 yards, that's still, 75 yards. That's still 3 laps in a pool, on a short course pool. On a 400-yard sprint, 15% is 60 yards. That's not insignificant. So light attacks and animation canceling in general, they are accepted by the combat and developers themselves. They don't view it as a bug, they don't view it as an exploit, they encourage people to light attack weave. Now, of course, they don't really put down any sort of in-game resource to teach you about light attack weaving. The only thing they have is that one loading screen tip, so that is a failure on their part. But they still accept light attack weaving as a part of their combat system, and it's part of what makes ESO combat unique compared to other MMOs, that you have this light attack weaving. You don't have auto attacks, you don't have a 2.5 second global cooldown or anything. You have light attack weaving, and that's what makes ESO unique, and it's what makes ESO a fast-paced combat game compared to some other MMOs. Furthermore, light attack weaving is, I would argue, essential to do very good DPS. Again, if we just use these 4 logs as an example, almost 20%, 17.6%. over 21%, about 13.5%. In all of these logs, except for this last one, light attacks make up the highest contribution of your overall DPS. This is the highest. Here is the highest. Just dual wield alone is the highest, not ignoring your Inferno Staff backboard light attacks on this parse here. It's still the highest contribution of your DPS. Here, again, it's a little bit of an anomaly where it is the second highest, but it's still very high compared to the other abilities that you have here. So mash and light attack weaving is essential if you want to do endgame content, if you want to do high-end PvE, PvE trials, vet hard mode trials, trifecta dungeon achievements, and so on. I won't be going into how to master light attack weaving. There are a ton of videos out there from a bunch of different content creators, each with their own sort of strategies to help you master light attack weaving. So I'll put a few of them down in the description below, but I would recommend that you guys practice light attack weaving if you have any intention of going into endgame PvE content. But that pretty much covers this topic. Hope you guys have learned something, and I will see you guys later.